I had just come back from my first year of Bible college, and now I was looking for a job. I'm sure you've been there before, trying to find the best job that will get you back to your second year. And so I began to look around Oshawa, which is where I lived, and there really weren't any jobs that were available. One day I received a phone call from a company that I had put my resume into. This was a company that was in charge of helping teenagers and adults who had special needs and disabilities. They had homes all over, I think they have them all over Canada. And this particular home specialized in teenagers. I thought that would fit who I was because my plan had been to go into ministry specifically for teenagers. So I was excited with the potential of a job, and here I was the day of the interview, ready to get this job. Sat down with a few people for the interview, and they began to ask me questions, and things were going really well. I seemed to be answering the questions according to their liking. And then they asked me that one question. How do you feel about changing the diaper of a teenager? How do I feel about that? How do you feel about that? Isn't that our dream? Don't we all want to grow up someday so we can change teenagers' bottoms? I mean, isn't that the most exciting thing? Truth is that it was the worst thing in my mind. In fact, I could only imagine how many times I would be sick after doing it or even during doing it. And so I paused, smiled, and I was very transparent and said, the truth is I'm not excited about that at all. In fact, it kind of grosses me out. But I need to get back to school, and I am willing to do whatever it takes. That statement was so key. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I had a goal, and I was willing to do whatever it takes. So many people live their lives with goals and dreams and things they'd like to see happen for the good of their lives, but they're not willing to do whatever it takes. And so what happens is we kind of sit back and we tune into Netflix or stream on YouTube or read a book about somebody else's story who has achieved wonderful things, and we sit back and do next to nothing because we're not willing to do whatever it takes. I want to tell you something today, is that God's plan for you is beyond sitting and watching Netflix. He's got a dream for your life, whether it's the macro level, big picture dream or your next step. He has something for you that is beyond just sitting back and watching somebody else's story, as long as you're willing to do whatever it takes. Well, we're going to look at 2 Kings chapter 13 today, verses 14 and 19. And I want to share a story about a man who was challenged on this whole idea of doing whatever it takes. It says this: Now Elisha had been suffering from the illness from which he died. Jehoash, king of Israel, went down to see him and wept over him. my father, he cried, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. Elisha said, Get a bow and some arrows, and he did so. Take the bow in your hands, he said to the king of Israel. And when he had taken it, Elisha put his hands on the king's hands. Open the east window, he said, and he opened it. Shoot, Elisha said, and he shot. The Lord's arrow of victory, the arrow of victory over Aram. Elisha declared, You will completely destroy the Arameans of Aphek. Then he said, Take the arrows, and the king took them. Elisha told him, Strike the ground. He struck it 3 times and stopped. The man of God was angry with him and said, You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times. Then you would have defeated Aram and completely destroyed it. But now you will defeat it only 3 times. So here's the deal. King Jehoshaphat is the king of Israel, and he's been doing things by his own code. He doesn't really care about God. He hasn't brought God into the equation of his life, and God's just kind of this back burner type of person for the king. The problem is that the king has come to a place where he's not able to beat the Arameans. His own strategic plans are not working, and he doesn't know what to do. He catches wind that there's a prophet in the land named Elisha, well known. And Elisha has often helped kings. He's often asked his God to step in, and Elisha's about to die. And so the king realizes that he better go to Elisha before he dies just to see what would happen if God were involved in the equation. As he gets there, they begin to have a conversation. And partway through the conversation, Elisha says to him that he's going to win. He's going to actually defeat the Arameans. But there's some things he's got to do before he's able to win. And those are the things that I want to pay attention to today. Because friends, nothing great takes place just by accident. It involves you doing something. The first thing we see is that you need to look out the window. Elisha tells the king to go to the window and look out it. That seems like such a strange thing. It's not just to enjoy the nice weather of the day. You see, what Elisha wants the king to do is he wants him to set his face towards the enemy. He wants him to see the land of the enemy. He wants him to get a picture for what the enemy's land looks like, because that's his mission. And it's important that if you're going to have a mission, that you get a picture in your mind of that mission. Something that you can see with your eyes. But even when your eyes are closed, it's so etched in your brain that you can see so specifically what it is. Whether it's the big level thing for your life or the next thing that God wants for you. You've got to get a picture in your mind. My wife and I were discussing one day what we would do when our kids were out of the house. At this point, our kids were really small. And they were a good distance from being out of the house, from us being empty nesters. But we began to talk about what it might look like when they were finally out of the house. And so we asked ourselves, would we be the Florida type of people? The individuals who found a second home down in Florida, traveled there every year, and then come home. Is that how we were going to spend our empty nest years? We thought we should pray about it and talk to God a little bit about what His plans were. And we would come back and discuss it one more time. When we came back after praying, we both felt that God had put in our heart that we were to do some mission stuff. You see, missions was in our heart, and we felt that God wanted us to, in the future, give of our time to help leaders around the world in their own leadership journey and pour into them. And so we made a commitment when our kids were really small that we would travel the world pouring into leaders as soon as our kids were out of the house. We had a picture. Well, friends, over the next few years, I began to work on a master's in leadership so that I had something to be able to offer when I stepped onto the field, when I stepped into those contexts. There were times where it definitely cost us money, but it cost us time. And times that you just wanted to quit because I was living a very busy life in my personal career. And yet I was trying to do this on the side, and it was so overwhelming. But I had this picture that just kept pushing me. And whenever we were frustrated, whenever we wanted to quit, we kept thinking about the picture. And friends, in 2015, I finished my master's. And we applied to be volunteer in missions in 2016 with the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada. And in 2017, years after we first got that picture, my wife and I began the journey of giving a couple weeks each year to international missions, traveling in 2017 to Thailand to pour into the leaders of the country. It all started when we got a picture. I want to tell you, God wants to plant a picture in your mind, a vision, a mission, something that you can see. This is who I want to become. This is what I want to do with my life. This is what the next stage needs to look like. Some picture. Go to the window and get a picture. Secondly, Elisha tells him while he's at the window to take an arrow and to shoot it out the window. Now, friends, the enemy's territory is a good distance away. There's not a chance in the world that this arrow that the king shoots is going to go flying through the air and hit the king of this nation or some prominent warrior. I mean, even if God were to touch this arrow, it would be beyond anybody's belief that this could happen. The arrow would be shot out the window and victory would instantaneously happen. So what's Elisha encouraging him to do? Why shoot the arrow? Well, in these days, in the ancient Near East, when a king became the king of a nation, he would go to a room that had 4 windows facing the north, south, east, and west. And he would shoot an arrow out of each window, making a declaration that his intent was to conquer the various areas of the world. That he would conquer the north, the south, the east, and the west. And every arrow was a declaration, I intend to conquer this part of the world. And so when the king is told to go to the window and to face his enemy and to shoot an arrow, he is making a public declaration of his intent to take out the enemy. I want to tell you that if you're going to accomplish the things that God has for your life, You've got to make a public intent. You've got to declare what you plan on doing. I'll never forget this one Sunday when I was a teenager. The pastor at my church had spoken a message about how we needed to tell people about our faith, sharing Jesus Christ with people. And so we all were stirred in our hearts, and that night he invited us to the front of the church to make a promise to God that we would share our faith. That night I went to the front and I said, God, I'm going to do this. And then something unique took place. He stopped the music that was playing at the moment, grabbed everybody's attention and said, hey, are you going to share your faith? Well, collectively we all said, yeah, we're going to do it. Then he said, are you going to share your faith this week? And we're like, yes, we're going to do it. And then in front of my entire church, he looked at me and he said, Jeff, are you going to share your faith this week? Well, friends, up to this point, it would have been so easy for me to make the promise to God in private and then just to walk away and not do it. But this moment where he forced me to make a public declaration, I was held accountable for that which was in my heart, for what I saw in the window. Because if I came back the next week and someone says, so did you tell someone? And I hadn't, I would look foolish. So that night I made a public declaration, shot my arrow through the window and said, I am going to tell someone about my faith this week. And that week I kept looking for the right moment, wanted to make sure I fulfilled it. And one day, my sister's friend who lived just down the street came over, and I began to talk to her, and I shared my faith with her and felt so great that I was able to accomplish what I had set out to do. That came about because I declared my intent. You see, if you're going to accomplish something, you can't just have it privately in your heart because it's easy to walk away from those things. You've got to make a public declaration. First of all, you need to write it down yourself. Something that you can keep going back to going, here's the vision. Here's what I see. This is what the next step is. This is the big picture from my life. Write it down. But then go to somebody else and say, hey, I want to tell you what I see. I want to shoot my arrow through the window and declare what I plan on doing. See, that person should hold you accountable. They should walk with you to make sure that you're fulfilling each of the steps along the way. They should be in your face and challenge you when you're not living up to your full potential of the dream. Make your intent public. Tell somebody, shoot your arrow through the window. The last thing we see in this passage is that we need to keep hitting the ground. Elisha tells the king to take some arrows and to hit the ground. The king is really perplexed with everything Elisha is telling him to do, but he gives in to the old guy because the guy's dying. And so he takes the arrows and he starts to hit the ground. 1, you know what, maybe just a little bit more. 2, you know what, 1 more. 3, all right, and he drops the arrows. I'm done. How do you think? What do you think about that, Elisha? And to his surprise, Elisha is upset. And Elisha says, you should have hit the ground 5 or 6 times. But because you gave up at 3, you won't fully defeat the enemy. You won't fulfill the vision that you have, the picture that's in your mind. What was the issue? Elisha was looking for a man who had enough passion that he would keep persevering, that he would keep going, that he would keep hitting the ground, that he'd keep going and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he would get to a place where Elisha would have to say, no, that's enough. No, I'm going to keep going. And, no, that's enough. No, I'm going to keep going. But all the king did, he just did the bare minimum. And friends, you will never accomplish the things that God has for you if you just do the bare minimum. You see, when you have passion and you have perseverance, you'll keep going and keep going and keep going no matter how tired you are. You'll keep going when people tell you to stop. You'll keep going when you want to quit. You'll keep going and keep going and keep going. I ran a youth conference a number of years ago, and I won't give you all the details of the situation, but we had this band come in on the Friday night. And what it meant for us was that if we were going to have this band and save the cost that we needed to save, we were going to have to work with another agency. And what that meant was that we would have to set up on the Friday of this conference. Then after the concert, we would have to tear down, put it all in a truck, and drive it an hour away. But we were going to save money. And so on the Thursday, my team rolled into the area where we'd be running this conference. I stayed up till about 4 o'clock in the morning that night, setting up for this conference. Got up at 7 o'clock the next day to go full tilt to do the setup that we needed for this concert. Did everything, put everything in place, had the concert, great night. Then tore everything down, put it in a truck, drove with my brother-in-law to the convention center where the equipment was needed to be, and then got back to my room at 5:30 in the morning to ensure myself an hour and a half sleep. So 2 nights with about 5 hours sleep, I still had 2 full days of this conference I had to run. Woke up that morning, went in the shower, hoping the water will wake me up, but I am just standing there incredibly exhausted. I finished my shower and I'm no more awake than I was when I got in the shower, and I'm standing in the mirror and I'm trying to dry my hair, do my hair, and my eyes are burning out of my head. And I turn to God and I say this. I say, God, I can't do this anymore. I've never felt more tired than I am. I want to quit right now. I don't have the energy to do what's needed for the next 2 days. God, I am done. And then God said to me, hey, Jeff, remember the picture. Remember the window. And I began to look into my mind of a picture that I had put there a while ago of teenagers being transformed by God, teenagers being transformed by the gospel, teenagers being set free from junk that they had brought into this convention. I had this picture in my mind. Remember the picture. And as I thought about who was going to be impacted, I pulled myself together and said, it's time to go. It's time to keep hitting the ground. It's time to keep going, to keep going, to keep going, to keep going. And I got up, got dressed, got myself together, left, and I ran the next 2 days as if I had the most energy that you've ever seen. Nobody knew how tired I was because I stayed focused on that picture. I kept hitting the ground. I kept hitting the ground. You see, friends, you have got to keep hitting the ground. There are going to be times you're going to be discouraged. There are going to be times you're tired. There are going to be times you are perplexed. There are going to be times that you feel like this is just enough, but you have got to keep hitting the ground. And when people tell you to stop hitting, keep hitting the ground. When people tell you that you've done enough, keep hitting the ground. Keep hitting the ground until you have succeeded in the dream that God has for you. Whether it's the big picture or the next step of your life, keep hitting the ground. There's a great story about Hernan Cortez. It was 1519, and he had sailed from Spain to what is now known as Mexico. As his men, 600 of them, with their 16 horses and 11 boats, pulled up on shore. They were excited about this new land because it's what they had set out for, a new land full of treasure and full of a new life. But as they got onto the shore, they realized that this land was inhabited. It would mean they would have to fight, not just sail. It would mean that there would be conflict, and it would involve sacrifice, and they were feeling a little overwhelmed. Hernan didn't know what to do. So he pulled the men together and tried an inspiring speech, tried to tell them about the riches they would have, tried to tell them about the great things that would be accomplished, tried to speak life into them. But he could still see the dismay on their faces. And so he said 3 words that would change the course of their lives forever. These were the 3 words. Burn the boats. Burn the boats. You see, in that moment, he was saying to his men, we are so committed to the picture we saw when we looked out the window that we will make sure there is nothing to stop us from hitting the ground. We will burn the boat so there is no exit for us so that we can take on the land. And they did. They defeated their enemy and conquered that land because they burned the boats. You see, friends, if you're going to accomplish what God has for you, if you're going to do the things that He dreams about for you, whether it's the macro level or the next steps, you've got to do whatever it takes. You've got to get the vision in your mind. Look out the window. You've got to make your intent known. Let the arrow go. Shoot it out the window. And lastly, friends, hit the ground. Keep hitting. Keep hitting. Keep hitting until you have accomplished what God has put into your heart, because He has something great for you. Let me pray for you tonight. Jesus, I want to thank you so much for my friends who are watching, those who are part of Oxygen Church. I'm asking, God, that you would help them to get a vision for what you have for them next, or maybe it's for their entire life. Let them look out the window and let that image be burned in their heads. I pray that they would shoot an arrow through the window, that they would make a public declaration. This is what I'm going to do in this next season. This is what I'm going to do with my life. Let them pull somebody in that can hold them accountable. But most of all, let them hit the ground and keep hitting and keep hitting and keep hitting and keep hitting so that they can accomplish what you have put into their hearts, regardless of how tired they are, regardless of how discouraged they are, that they will accomplish the things that you've set out for their life, and they wouldn't just sit back and watch life pass them by. I pray this now in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, friends.